Now, to conclude with the speakers of this excellent panel, we'll hear from our third panelist, Dr. Virginie TASSIN CAMPANELLA. She's advocate at la Cour de Paris and also at Zurich, and is the founder and director of VTA TASSIN, the first public international law firm dedicated to oceans and seas, and established in 2016. Professor TASSIN CAMPANELLA will address the broader context with reflections on role of sectoral bodies and institutions, cooperation, and ocean observation. Dr. TASSIN, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to join first, actually, my colleague to express my deepest gratitude to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Korean Society of International Law, and the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. It's a great honor to be here and to be able to contribute. So I'm going to discuss actually about the role of sectoral bodies and institutions and focus mainly on the role of intergovernmental organization and specifically issues of cooperation for the conduct and regulation of ocean observation activities. But to be able actually to understand this, we need first and foremost to identify the stakeholders of ocean governance and understanding their roles. So I'm sure you've seen this graph many times, actually depicting the bodies of ocean governance. And while this graph is actually extremely relevant, since it also includes the 17th RFMOs under the FAO and also the 13th Regional Sea programs under UNEP, this program is actually, to me, not really reflective of ocean governance because it doesn't include the many sectoral institutions and bodies that are not part of the UN. And there's a lot actually on intergovernmental and international institutions that have played a key role in ocean governance and are still playing a very important key role today. So ocean governance today is actually characterized by a diversity of ocean users, a great diversity of interest with an important role of non-state actors, and a diversity of institutions. And as many actually of you have already highlighted it, we operate in an ocean governance framework that is often depicted as fragmented. So if I take, for example, this graph of the 13th Regional Sea Convention frameworks, where actually in each of the regions you have other frameworks applicable, and you actually layer it with, for example, the fisheries organization, with this one and this one. So you see, you can layer them. There's a great challenge in the consistencies of actions and cooperation. But the word actually of fragmentation, I find it actually quite negative. And so usually through my practice, I've been actually finding it very precious to have these different type of institutions and layers to be able to provide support and find solution at the individual level, sub-regional and regional levels, to develop methods, solutions, and standards that actually could not be adopted at the international level. So this diversity and this complexity is also a source of solution. So now let's dive to ocean observation and operational oceanography. I'm sure a lot of you actually have heard about the different types of ocean observation, methodologies, techniques, and technologies, and actually Jose depicted really well the different technologies that are nowadays available. But I'm sure you're not really aware actually of the subtleties of the regulation and the different type of categories we can have within ocean observation activities. So ocean observation activities, it's basically the measurement and the collection of data, and it's more related to research on different types of characteristics of the marine environment. So you have the physical characteristic, the chemical characteristic, and the biological characteristics. And they usually measure different type of characteristics, for example, sea temperatures, the melting of ice, the concentration of oxygen, algal bloom, certain type of stream, for example, in the Atlantic Ocean for El Niño. So we use actually ocean observation almost every day. But a different type of ocean observation activity has been developed since the 70s, which is not really research, so limited in time and in scope, for example, but operated on a routinely basis. And this is what we call operational oceanography. These type of activities have been very much developed thanks to the influence of meteorology that has developed real-time forecast that we all see now on our mobile, checking all the time the meteo. And basically, they measure, they conduct systematic and routine collection and interpretation also of ocean data to provide this type of forecast. What is interesting with these two types of activities is that they could be conducted in different spaces, in the marine space, so in the water column, on the seabed, also on the air space above the marine environment, so it's still under the scope of the law of the sea, but also they could be conducted from the outer space through satellites. The capabilities actually of this type of technologies and have evolved. I will say 10, 20 years ago, they were more able, especially for satellites, to only collect data on the chemical and physical characteristic, and now they're actually able to measure, for example, ocean biological productivity and cloud characteristics. You have many different forms of observation, and within the conduct of ocean observation, you not only have observation, you have also analysis, simulation, and modeling for the prediction, with different type of new technology, including AI, actually, as Jose mentioned it. You need also to understand that with the evolution of technologies, including platforms that are getting more and more sophisticated, and new technologies such as the digital twins actually coming, which is a sort of simulation of Earth when they will be actually inserting all the different layers of data and use this simulation to run scenarios and understand the impact of activities. In this context, there's a lot of development of technologies, but also with regards to satellites. There's a lot of satellites at the moment conducting Earth observation, around 1,800 satellites that are actually expected to triple in 10 years. And this is in the context of what we call in space law crowded sky. It means almost too many satellites around the Earth. So there's a very important interest towards this type of technology. But why actually using these technologies and conducting these activities of ocean observation? Well, when we look at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, there are two main pillars. The first one is the implementation of the duties of protection and preservation of the marine environment, so Part 12. Part 12 is a very forward-looking part of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It's one of the most solid environmental regulation within an international agreement. And as you all know, there's a very important and symbolic duty of prevention and reduction of and control of pollution. As we've seen with the ICLS advisory opinion, pollution could take many forms, including greenhouse emission, but also it could be noise pollution, light pollution, dumping, or other type of pollution coming, for example, from seabed activities or activities in the area. Under this, let's say, big house of duties for the protection and preservation and fight against all forms of pollution, states actually have cooperation duties to study, research, and exchange information and data. They have also monitoring and environmental assessment duties, under which they have to observe, measure, evaluate, and analyze by scientific methods and the risk and effects of the pollution of the marine environment. The only issue that I have actually with Part 12, even though it's a very complete and solid part, again, is that it's mainly actually focused on pollution. And the added value of the BBNG agreement is that it will help to actually expand these duties in light of the sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So that was the first pillar, why conducting ocean observation activities. They could be also very useful for the implementation of sovereign rights, of conservation and management of natural resources within the EEZ, so living and non-living resources. coordination also and duty to ensure the conservation and development of stocks occurring within the EZ and between the EZ and beyond the EZ, and cooperation to ensure conservation and the promotion of the optimum utilization of highly migratory species. So you see actually that these observation activities could be served for many different types of users, and they are really a tool basically used by states to implement these legal obligations. So what type of regulation we have in international law and how these activities are regulated? First and foremost, because as I told you, classical ocean observation activities mainly relate to research activities that actually used to be in the 70s, mainly also conducted by states and academics. The regime of marine scientific research in Part 13 of UNCLOS is extremely relevant. The problem with the regime of marine scientific research is that there's no definition of what is marine scientific research. And so there's been a lot of debate about how to regulate different types of ocean observation activities, and specifically if routine observations, so what has been called operational oceanography, fall also under what we could consider research, and then require, when it's conducted within national jurisdiction, the prior consent of the coastal states. Anyhow, if it's considered under the marine scientific research, you have a two-gear system that is actually planned under UNCLOS, with marine scientific research within national jurisdiction with a prior consent, beyond national jurisdiction as a freedom of the high seas, and in both cases, it has to be actually conducted with due regards of other rights and activities. We have certain limitations actually to the implementation of marine scientific research legal regime to ocean observation, especially for ocean observation conducted by satellites, because the regulation of scientific research installation and equipment is limited to those in any areas of the marine environment. What happened actually with the debate around the regulation of ocean observation activities is that there's been a sort of a dissociation between classical ocean observation and operational oceanography. And the IOC UNESCO has been doing a very important work in this regard through ABELOS. And ABELOS actually reveals that there's a lot of disagreements of states with regards to the rules applicable to operational oceanography. Certain states considering that this type of routine observations still require the consent of the coastal states, some others saying that actually it falls outside of the regime of marine scientific research. What happens also when we have ocean observation activities conducted from the outer space? So as it's been highlighted also by the International Seabed Authority, the data coming from satellites plays a very important role in the everyday monitoring and assessment actually of the impact of activities, but also the health of the marine environment. Well, there's a lot of issues actually, because while remote sensing activities are not regulated by UNCLOS, because UNCLOS only applies to the airspace above the marine environment, and there's debate about to which extent the airspace could be included. The outer space is not included into the scope of UNCLOS. So we need to look at space law. And we don't find much actually in space law about activities conducting ocean observation. If we look at the Outer Space Treaty of '67, we see that Article 1 talks about the use of outer space for the benefit and interest of all countries, and there shall be freedom of scientific investigation, and also an encouragement for international cooperation. So it's very similar to the law of the sea, also because space law was shaped on the basis of the law of the sea. And then when we actually dive into Article 9, we see that the use of outer space should have due regard to the corresponding interest of all the other states and undertake international consultation before proceeding with any activity. But unfortunately, the end of the article is limiting the scope to this article to ocean activities because it only deals with harmful effects on the environment of the moon and other celestial bodies and outer space. So because of the great development of remote sensing activities in the 80s, the UN actually member states have been adopting a resolution, non-legally binding, the principles relating to remote sensing activities from Earth to the outer space, where activities with the purpose of improving natural resource management, land use, and the protection of the marine environment are included into the scope of these principles, which actually set out a mechanism of consultation of the sense state before the activities are taking place, and agreement of the sense state for operation, collection, storage, and processing of the data. But we see actually that a lot of ocean observation activities are poorly actually regulated at the moment, despite the great development of these technologies. Even UNCLOS makes a distinction between marine scientific research and hydrographic surveys. UNCLOS doesn't regulate the commercial observation of the ocean, does not really regulate unmanned vehicles, installation and drones, for example, gliders and floaters. And the implementation trends and state practice shows actually very important disagreements, mainly related to the protection of sovereignty, sovereign rights, but also the protection of resources, because when you have a lot of, for example, fishery resources, you don't not necessarily want to have this information being on open access because of the fear of illegal fishing and other type of activities. So, for example, activities such as seabed mapping in certain areas in shallow waters are very difficult to be conducted, even for natural risk observation, tsunami prevention, due to, for example, observation on the seabed through acoustic placed in the submarine cables are difficult. The navies and the defense sector is very sensitive, and a lot of coastal observation are facing challenges. There's a lot of ongoing also legal issues, and I will talk about only 2 or 3. The first one, for example, is environmental liability, the consequences of policy decisions that are based on inaccurate models or shared data leading to ecological harm, and also the dual use of data, collection of data, for example, for biodiversity monitoring, but then will be used for commercial or military purposes. So what is the role actually of sectoral bodies and intergovernmental organizations? Well, the first thing actually is to remind about the cooperation duties that were actually existing, of course, before the BBNG agreements. There's two main sets of cooperation duties at the global and regional basis, where states cooperate to establish rules, standards, and recommended practice, but also specific cooperation rules in enclosed and semi-enclosed sea, where we see that cooperation duties are a bit broader. For example, coordination to manage, conserve, explore, and exploit the living resources, the implementation of rights and duties with the protection of the marine environment, coordination of scientific research or jointly programs, and invitation also of other states or entities or organizations to cooperate with them. We see also that these cooperation duties have been actually highlighted as key duties by the jurisprudence. And I'm going to briefly actually mention the 3 advisory opinions of ICLS. This list is, of course, non-exhaustive. We see in the latest advisory opinion that cooperation duties are actually relevant in the assessment of compliance with obligation, and I find it extremely interesting when you actually evaluate the implementation of the protection and preservation duties of states. But also the 2015 advisory opinion on Sub-Regional Fisheries Commission, which highlighted the duty of cooperation with member states and non-member states to address IUU fishing. And also the 2011 advisory opinion of the Seabed Chamber, which highlighted the key role of new scientific and technological knowledge in the implementation of obligation to prevent pollution. So what have been actually the contribution of sectoral bodies and mainly intergovernmental organizations? I'm going to talk about only 2 levels, and this is of course not representative, but it will just give you an insight. At the international level, the IOC UNESCO has played a very important role in actually discussing the legal regime applicable to ocean observation and operational oceanography, and has put in place the legal framework, which is a voluntary framework about Argo floats. So Argo floats are actually floaters that are not controlled directly, and that can derive actually drift from the high seas to the EEZs. And actually states agree to not apply the marine scientific research regime and let voluntarily actually these floaters collecting data float without requiring consent. And the IOC UNESCO has been also conducting a lot of work with pushing also the private sector to release the data, because basically ocean data is mainly owned by the private sector. The International Hydrographic Organization has played also a very important role in developing standards, including standards that could be used for the modeling of ocean data and analysis, and also a standard S122 that is actually not written here, that will be used actually and very key to the implementation of the BBNG agreements. Has been also developing guidelines on crowdsourced bathymetry, establishing MOUs, including with the International Seabed Authority, to exchange data and promote the safety of operation in the seabeds. But in the regional level, we see also emblematic institutions such as the Arctic Council, which actually gathers unclosed and non-unclosed parties who manage to create a framework, the Arctic Spatial Data Infrastructure, to promote the interoperability of geospatial information, and has also adopted the agreement on enhancing international Arctic scientific cooperation, where these agreements gather Arctic and non-Arctic states. And this is very interesting also because this operates within national jurisdiction, and ocean observation, survey, and modeling are actually included into scientific research. Another type of organization that is very important is the one of the Kuwait Regional Convention, the HOPM, who has been also doing a lot of work with ocean observation and the collection and exchange of data between member states. And HOP has been also creating MOUs with regional fisheries management. And both of the actually implementation actions under the Kuwait Regional Convention and MOU actually reflect that the sensitivities of states to put restriction on the use and collection of data. So basically, to conclude, we see that ocean observation activities are at the moment poorly regulated due to the disagreements of states. There's, however, rapid expansion of these activities, rapid evolution of infrastructures and technologies, important legal gaps, and still a lot of investments. So when we say that there's no legal security equal investments issues, this is actually not the case. There's a lot of investments on these technologies. With regards to cooperation duties, we see actually that the practice of intergovernmental organizations have been demonstrating an ability to navigate legal gaps and advance step by step, promote standards and guidelines, and secure, actually thanks to the trust of their members, the implementation of their legal obligation. And what I find really interesting to conclude is actually the cooperation synergies that we can see in the practice of intergovernmental organization between the members of the same intergovernmental organization, between unclosed and non-unclosed parties, between various intergovernmental organizations and other type of organization, but also between various forms of organization. And for me, they really represent what I call the guardian of the legal order of the ocean. Their practice, for most of them, is confidential. It's not easily understood, and often intergovernmental organizations are criticized for their shortcomings, but I think they will gain to be a bit more understood and known for the wonderful support they provide to the implementation of the law of the sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tassin, for that comprehensive and engaging presentation.